She's just a black woman in a robe. What's she gonna do, lecture me to death? That's what Colton R., Sutter whispered to his lawyer, seconds before pulling a loaded gun in federal court. He didn't see a judge. He saw defiance in the wrong skin. And to him, that meant war. What he didn't realize, the woman he mocked wasn't just any judge. She was a silent force behind a national reform plan that had already taken down 3 of his superiors. And today, she was ready for him too. If someone can point a gun at a federal judge and still believe they're untouchable, what does that tell you about the system protecting them? Where are you from? And could it happen there too? This isn't a courtroom drama. It's real. Let me show you what happened the day justice stopped flinching. Dawn had yet to fully break, as thick clouds loomed low over the domed roof of the Fairbridge Federal Courthouse. Towering marble columns caught the first light of morning, as it tried to push back the heavy tension waiting to erupt inside. In Courtroom 3B, tension was no stranger. But today, it clung to the collars of those present like a thick mist no one could shake off. The seats had filled early. Court staff lingered with flimsy excuses just to remain inside. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, phones on silent but cameras ready. The bailiff stood rigid, their eyes fixed on the defense table. On Colton R., Sutter, his posture resembled a man behind the wheel of a patrol car, leaned back, arms crossed, chin raised like he owned the place. His wrinkled gray suit pulled tight at the shoulders, sleeves a full inch too short. His eyes scanned the room like a predator pacing in a zoo cage. No fear, just contempt. He smirked when he saw the woman entering from the east hallway. Naomi Ellsworth, 48, a federal judge, black, hair pinned in a tight bun, carrying her black robe as if it were stitched into her bloodline. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She'd read his file more times than her law text in the past month, and she knew his type. Men like Colton Sutter, who wore a badge like a birthright and treated the law like a tool to be bent, as long as the uniform still fit. A staffer whispered to a colleague, he doesn't believe a black woman like her has any right sitting higher than him. The other nodded, eyes fixed on Judge Ellsworth. She ascended the bench, robe sleeves gliding like black wings across the polished wooden floor. As she took her seat, the hinges of the chair creaked, almost as if the courtroom itself had to adjust to absorb the weight of her presence. No slogans, no declarations, just the silent gravity of a woman who'd held her ground through 2 decades of political storms and racial bias. Court is now in session, the bailiff declared. Judge Naomi raised the gavel and struck it, one sharp, echoing crack that seemed to wake the whole room. Sutter didn't flinch, didn't shrink. He offered a faint smirk, turning to his lawyer. If this is justice, we're watching a soap opera. The lawyer whispered back, say one more word, and you'll be watching the next episode from a holding cell. But Sutter didn't care. He wasn't afraid of the court. He just had nothing but disdain for the judge seated above him, because she was a woman and she was black. And for him, those 2 facts were reason enough to scoff. And there, under the pale morning light, the showdown began between a man who'd long been protected by his badge and a woman who'd been underestimated simply for being herself. Soon, the entire city of Fairbridge would come to understand. This was no ordinary trial. This was a reckoning. And the whole system was about to be dragged into the light. The gavel's echoes still lingered when the next witness stepped up, a digital forensic analyst from an independent unit. She carried a timeline, GPS records, and recovered audio files from internal servers, all pointing to one truth. Officer Colton R. Sutter had lied. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word hit like fingernails scraping across a hidden truth. The patrol vehicle's data shows the stop occurred at a time inconsistent with the defendant's report, she said. Furthermore, the audio from Officer Sutter's body cam was edited. At least 46 seconds are missing. The courtroom held its breath. Sutter sat motionless, but his fingers twitched. His jaw ticked. One hand slid from his knee to rub along his pant leg. Small movements, each a signal. He was preparing for something. Bullshit, he muttered, just loud enough for front row to hear. Judge Naomi Ellsworth looked down at him, her gaze cutting like a sharpened blade. Mr. Sutter, she said, not loudly, not harshly, just calm. And it was that calm that made the air turn colder. One more interruption, and you'll be removed from this courtroom. With all due respect, ma'am. Sutter leaned forward, his voice lower now, but each word dragged up from the depths of resentment. How am I supposed to sit here quietly while this entire room puts on a cheap theater show to assassinate my character? That is not your choice, Naomi replied. It's the law's responsibility. Your attorney will have time to respond. Sutter snorted. The law. He repeated the words like they were the filthiest in his vocabulary. For a moment, silence fell over the room again. But Naomi saw it. His expression had shifted. The arrogance was gone. What remained was hollow. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of men about to discard all rules to preserve the warped image they had of themselves. And then movement. Very fast. But not so fast that her eyes missed it. His hand slipped inside his suit jacket. Something metallic glinted beneath the fabric. "Colton," his lawyer shouted. But it was too late. He drew a small black handgun, not large but heavy and well concealed. No one had time to react. No one screamed. The room froze because everyone knew this wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of war. The barrel pointed straight at the bench. Naomi Ellsworth didn't blink. She didn't lean back. She remained seated, hands on the desk, spine straight as if refusing to give fear a seat at the table. "Don't move." Sutter screamed, his voice no longer that of a law enforcer. It was the voice of a man stripped bare, clinging to fear, cloaked in madness. A scream burst from the press gallery. A pen fell, its soft clink chilling in the silence. Naomi inhaled slowly. "You've done something you can't undo," she said, her voice a whisper, but solid as stone. Sutter laughed, a twisted laugh, not of triumph, but of someone who knew he'd reached the end of the line. In that moment, the Fairbridge Federal Courthouse was no longer a place of justice. It became a battlefield between truth and the terror of being replaced. And the first bullet, though not yet fired, had already exploded in every mind present. The gun still pointed at the bench. The entire courtroom was frozen. Bailiffs stood rigid, hands near their holsters, but none dared draw. One wrong move, one wrong sound, and everything would shatter. But Naomi Ellsworth did not flinch. She didn't duck. She didn't raise her hands. She just sat there, both palms on the table, eyes fixed on Colton R. Sutter like he was holding nothing more than a guilty conscience. "You brought a gun into a courtroom," she said, voice steady, no louder than before. "I hope you understand what that means." Sutter smirked, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was crooked, forced, like a mask beginning to crack. "You don't know anything," he growled. "You sit there, above us all, thinking you've got power, but you don't understand a damn thing." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving the barrel of the gun. "Then explain it to me. What do you want, Officer Sutter?" "Not you," he snapped. "Not someone like you sitting there judging me. I've done this job for 18 years. I kept order in streets you wouldn't dare drive through at night. I bled to keep the city safe, while you sat in air-conditioned chambers, writing warrants." Naomi didn't blink. "Safe," she repeated, "by manipulating reports, deleting footage, assaulting handcuffed suspects? Is that your definition of justice?" The gun twitched. His hand was shaking. "You think you're better than me?" Sutter shouted. "You think your fancy words can break me down?" Naomi shook her head slowly. "I don't think words will break you. I think you broke long before you walked into this courtroom. The moment you believed power meant never being questioned. The silence stretched longer than time itself. You're shaking. Officer Sutter," she said gently, like a breeze brushing through a crack in the wall. "Not because you fear me, but because you fear the truth. You fear that if you put down that gun, there will be nothing left to hold you up." The entire courtroom held its breath. Sutter stood frozen. He blinked and looked around, the lowered heads, the frightened eyes. But something else was there too, disappointment. And then Naomi spoke again, pulling the last thread taut. "You once wore a badge, a symbol of trust, but you didn't use it to serve the people. You used it to hide the fear gnawing inside you. And now, without the badge, without the shield of your brothers, you're just a man holding a gun, begging the world to believe you're still in control." "Shut up," Sutter screamed. but didn't move forward. Naomi leaned in slightly. Not a challenge, not provocation, just presence, steady as stone. "You've already lost, Colton," she whispered. "Not because you brought a gun into this courtroom, but because you believed it was the last thing that made you matter." Sutter opened his mouth, but no words came out. The gun lowered slightly. His chest heaved, sweat pooling along his temple in glistening streams. A faint metallic click echoed from the rear. Carla Drayton was weaving through the left corridor, SWAT officers behind her. No one rushed. They were waiting for the signal. Naomi knew. She could feel time contracting around her. This was the space between life and death, not because of a bullet, but because of a choice. "Is this really how you want to end?" she asked, for the first time letting emotion slip through. "In their eyes? In your own?" And then only breath. The sound of a man unraveling from the inside out. No shot. Not yet. But Naomi knew the wall was cracking. And if it collapsed, she would be the first to witness it, and the last still standing. The gun in Sutter's hand dipped a few inches, then wavered upward again, trembling, as if it were caught between two forces. On one side, the illusion of control he clung to for years. On the other, the truth closing in like floodwater. Naomi Ellsworth still didn't move. "You can stop right now," she said, her voice steady. "And there's still a small chance to save what's left of the man in you." Sutter's face twitched. He turned his head, his eyes sweeping over the people crouching behind chairs, behind the judge's bench, behind places that were never meant to be shelters in a courtroom of justice. And then he turned back. "No," he whispered. "It's too late." Bang! The gunshot ripped through the room like a blade. Every sound vanished. The bullet screamed through the air, slicing through the dim morning haze and slamming into the wooden panel, just 4 inches to the right of Judge Ellsworth's seat. A cold shiver ran down every spine. A bailiff shouted. Naomi didn't flinch. That very moment, Carla Drayton burst through the door. The SWAT team flooded in from both directions, the main aisle and the staff corridor. "Drop the weapon. Get on the ground. Hands where we can see them." Sutter spun, trying to aim the gun at the SWAT officers, but he was too slow. A ballistic shield slammed into his chest, knocking the weapon from his hand. It skidded across the polished wood floor, spinning twice before landing at the feet of a trembling female reporter. "Subdue him," Carla shouted, for officers charged forward, slamming Sutter to the ground. His head struck the wooden ledge, blood trickling from his temple. His arms were yanked behind his back, steel cuffs locking around his wrists. No resistance. He was spent. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Sobs, screams, the bailiff shouting for medics. And just when it seemed everything was finally over, something unexpected happened. A live stream camera, owned by an independent news outlet, had accidentally gone live at the moment the shot was fired. Over 85,000 people were watching in real time as a white police officer attempted to shoot a black federal judge in the middle of a courtroom. And what set the nation ablaze? Naomi Ellsworth's astonishing calm, sitting like a granite column as the bullet zipped past her chest. It wasn't just an incident. It was an image, a symbol. She never ducked. One viewer commented. Didn't flinch. Didn't hide. She sat there like justice had never learned to be afraid. Naomi stood as the room still reeled in shock. She walked slowly toward the fallen gun, stared at it for a moment, then turned to face Sutter, his cheek now pressed against the floorboards. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The shot had missed, but its meaning had not. In that moment, Naomi Ellsworth was no longer just a judge. She became living proof of something the entire system had long denied. That justice, no matter the color of its skin, could still stand tall, even when staring down the barrel of a gun. And for the first time in many years, she was no longer alone in the truth. 2 days after the shooting in Courtroom 3B, the Fairbridge Federal Court building had yet to fully reopen. Photos of Naomi Ellsworth sitting motionless after the stray bullet had flooded newsstands and national broadcasts. The media dubbed her the woman who never bowed. But Naomi paid no attention to the nickname. She was combing through files. Not because she questioned Colton Sutter's guilt. The evidence was more than enough to lock him away for life. What kept her awake at night was a deeper question. How had someone like him existed so long inside the justice system without anyone stopping him? At 6:40 a.m., she called Ava Sinclair, the court's internal coordinator, and requested all documents related to Colton R. Sutter from 2010 onward. Ava hesitated at first, but all it took was one sentence from Naomi, and she agreed. If we don't dig deep, all we're doing is sweeping the surface while letting the rot remain underneath. By that afternoon, Naomi received 2 boxes of paper records, 3 digital folders, and 1 external hard drive from the internal archives. But something was off. Many files were missing dates, lacked signatures, and more suspiciously, citizen complaints had all been stamped, resolved within 48 hours, without any outcome reports attached. She called in one more person, Reagan Voss, a young investigative journalist from the Fairbridge Sentinel, known for exposing a major transportation funding scandal 3 years earlier. Reagan arrived at 5:12 p.m., armed with a voice recorder, a portable scanner, and 2 black coffees, no sugar. "This isn't an interview," Naomi said bluntly. "I need you to connect the dots. I have a timeline, but I need an outside eye to reassemble the pieces that were bent out of shape." The 2 worked late into the night, and at exactly 11:46 p.m., Reagan found something odd. 3 citizen complaints about Sutter, all using the same font, same formatting, same processing stamp, had been signed off by the same person, Captain Ronan Willoughby, the Internal Affairs Supervisor at the Fairbridge Police Department for the past 9 years. He's the only one who approved all internal reports on Sutter? Reagan asked. "Not just approved," Naomi replied. "He personally briefed the DA every time a request came in, but left no audio logs, no transcripts, nothing." Reagan nodded slowly. "And he's still in office." Naomi stood, staring at the whiteboard they'd filled. Dates, names, timelines, verdicts, complaints. A red string ran from Sutter's name to Willoughby's, then across to the left side, where a printed email was pinned from a human resources team lead. It read, "If more complaints about Sutter arise, resolve them before year-end salary reviews." "This isn't individual misconduct," Naomi said. "This is a protection network." Right then, the office door flew open. Carla Drayton walked in, holding a file, her face dark with disbelief. "I couldn't believe my eyes," she said, dropping the stack onto the table. "We checked the archive. Sutter's name is missing from the last 3 years of internal performance reviews. Not because it was overlooked, because it was deleted. Any trace of who deleted it?" Naomi asked. "Not yet, but the backup data still exists. We're in the process of recovering it." Naomi closed her eyes gently, then opened them again, her gaze as hard as carved stone. "I used to think this case ended when that bullet missed me, but now I know that bullet was just the beginning." The room was silent, but on the whiteboard, every red string was beginning to connect, forming the shape of a giant beast that had lived far too long in the shadows. It had not been fed by bullets, but by systemic silence. And Naomi Ellsworth, the woman who once held a gavel, was now wielding a scalpel of truth. The next morning, Judge Naomi Ellsworth's office was no longer just a place of work. It had become a temporary investigation center. White boards covered one entire wall, plastered with sticky notes, names, and faded printouts of long-buried reports. Threads of red, blue, and yellow string crisscross faces and timelines. These weren't just personnel files anymore. They were the structural map of a silencing machine. Naomi, Carla Drayton, and Reagan Voss were no longer working alone. A new figure had entered the room. Tiffany Drayton, a special investigator from the State Commission on Judicial Standards. No relation to Carla, but they shared the same steel-like focus. Tiffany's eyes were as sharp as a microscope lens, and her voice tapped evenly like a metronome over the mounting evidence. "This isn't just an internal affairs case anymore," she said. "We're looking at a protective structure that's been in place for nearly a decade." Naomi nodded, and Sutter was just the hook. The real power wore him like a camouflage jacket. Reagan was combing through payroll statements when she suddenly bolted upright. "Here it is. Look at this." She slid a packet of documents toward Naomi. Former Chief Inspector Alton Ferris received a special allowance from the Personnel Board just 10 days after ruling insufficient evidence in a 2017 complaint against Sutter. Naomi squinted. Special allowance? $12,000. Reagan replied. Approved by Everett Kane, the city's prosecuting attorney. Carla furrowed her brow. Kane? He's still in office? Naomi said nothing for a moment. 1 beat, 2 beats. Then she turned to Tiffany. Do we have the authority to access municipal spending records? We do, Tiffany replied crisply, with a provisional oversight order. And if we find signs of misconduct, I can summon witnesses. But we'll need stronger evidence to take Kane down. Carla slid a USB flash drive toward them. We've got it. Pulled from yesterday's deleted backup. Email thread between Kane and Captain Willoughby. Subject line. Internal handling strategy. Avoid October report disclosure. Reagan opened her laptop, hands slightly trembling with anticipation. The email wasn't long. No threats, no dramatics. Just a few carefully worded sentences. But in the world of justice, implication often lies in tone. If we're not careful, everything could be exposed at once. Let Sutter burn himself out. Don't let the flames reach the rest of it. Naomi fell silent, then slowly exhaled. They knew Sutter was a ticking bomb, and instead of defusing it, they threw a fire blanket over it. Tiffany scribbled down quickly. Ferris, Willoughby, Kane, 3 high-level links, directly blocking the investigation. We need to bring them into the light. Naomi said nothing. She stepped to the board, grabbed a red marker, and circled the 3 names. Then she drew a line connecting them to a new handwritten label, Sutter's Shield. That afternoon, Naomi convened a private meeting at the Commonwealth Civic Hall. No press, no cameras, only members of the Judicial Committee, a deputy governor's aide, and a handful of community members whose complaints had been ignored for years. She laid out all the evidence, clearly, without embellishment, no grandstanding, just facts. When Kane's name came up, murmurs spread through the room. One man stood up, holding a copy of his 2018 complaint form. This is the first time I've seen anyone actually read this. Naomi scanned the room, her voice lowering. I don't need you to believe me, but if we don't act now, this system will breed another Sutter, another Kane, and a whole new generation will grow up thinking justice is something you can erase with a delete key. The room stood still. Then, one by one, they nodded. A new investigation was opened, and this time, there would be no escape for those hiding in the shadows. 3 days after the private meeting at Commonwealth Civic Hall, the state of South Carolina was no longer silent. Reagan Voss's investigative series landed on the front page of the Fairbridge Sentinel with the headline, The Badge in the Darkness. Who protected Sutter? The article was shared more than 200,000 times in just 36 hours. It wasn't a news report. It was a mirror held up to the system. Every email, every signature was exposed. Names like Everett Kane, Alton Ferris, and Ronan Willoughby were no longer vague bureaucrats buried in paperwork. They were now the focus of unfinished justice. Public pressure forced the State Judicial Conduct Oversight Committee to hold a public hearing. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the hearing was broadcast live from the state capitol's grand chamber, instead of the usual cold, private rooms. Naomi Ellsworth did not sit at the bench. She sat in the front row of the gallery, no judge's robe, and not a word spoken. Yet every camera pointed toward her. Tiffany Drayton was the first to testify. Calm and precise, she laid out the evidence map like an architect revealing a rotten foundation. Carla Drayton followed, citing internal reporting failures straight from the system's core. Then, mid-morning, the unexpected happened. An anonymous witness walked in, a middle-aged man, baseball cap pulled low, shoulders slightly hunched. No one recognized him at first, but when he removed the cap, the entire chamber fell silent. Robert M. Easton, the former state director of human resources, who was believed to have retired for health reasons in 2020, had just walked back into the storm, and what he said landed like a bomb. I knew about the special allowances. I was the one who signed them, but I didn't sign because I didn't know. I signed because I was threatened. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Robert reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrinkled stack of papers. printout of emails, security footage from City Hall, and an audio recording of a phone call between him and Everett Kane. If you don't sign, I'll make sure people find out your daughter was federally indicted in 2014. It's not relevant, but we both know the media doesn't need truth, just poison. That single line, played over the microphone, froze the entire room. Naomi tilted her head slightly, but did not blink. Reagan gripped her pen tighter, her eyes locked on every twitch from the oversight panel. The committee chair tapped the gavel gently. Mr. Easton's records would be entered as criminal evidence. During the lunch recess, 3 events unfolded almost simultaneously. Kane submitted his resignation. No statement, no appearance. Alton Ferris was urgently summoned and escorted from his home in a government vehicle. A public statement from the governor's office announced the formation of a special task force in cooperation with the FBI to investigate the citywide network of internal manipulation. The crowd outside the Capitol burst into applause as the news broke, not for the downfall, but because finally someone had touched the one thing no one had ever dared to say out loud. That afternoon, Naomi stepped out of the chamber. No press conference, no waving to reporters. But she looked up at the very steps where prosecutors and public officials once climbed with pride. Today, they were walking down in silence. Reagan caught up to her in the parking lot, still breathless. "We just caused an earthquake." Naomi gave a quiet smile. "No, that was just a tremor. The aftershocks of truth. That's what keeps them awake at night." And then she opened the car door and drove away. No sirens, no cameras. Just a woman who had dared to drag the truth into the light and trusted the light to do the rest. The third hearing at the state capitol's grand chamber drew more attention than a high-level criminal trial. Not because someone was being charged, but because, for the first time in nearly 20 years, a federal judge stepped up to the podium not to issue a verdict, but to chart a way out for an entire system. Naomi Ellsworth, 48, did not wear her judge's robe that day. She chose a plain black suit. No badge, no legal ring, just a thick dossier, nearly 2 inches deep, held in her hands, not carried in a briefcase. The hall was silent as she walked to the wooden podium. Cameras flashed, but Naomi didn't glance at them. She looked straight at the committee, then past them, to the citizens sitting quietly in the gallery, faces that had once filed complaints never read, swallowed grief no one ever acknowledged. "I'm not here to apologize on behalf of system," Naomi began, her voice unwavering. "I'm here to dismantle it." She didn't use grand words. She listed sharp, succinct. 29 internal complaints closed within 72 hours. 17 instances of edited body cam footage with no external audit. 6 individuals promoted after efficiently resolving incidents involving Sutter. "We don't need to fix this machine," she said. "We need to build a new one from outside its walls." Then, Naomi laid out 3 key proposals for reform. 1. Establish an independent civilian oversight board with full access to original records, the authority to summon witnesses, and the power to issue temporary suspension for any officer or judicial employee implicated in misconduct. 2. Suspend all operations of the Division of Standards and Review for 90 days, replacing it with a cross-functional task force made up of community attorneys, data analysts, and representatives from civic advocacy groups. 3. Conduct a full audit of every case involving Sutter from the past 10 years, including rule convictions, dismissed cases, and previously ignored complaints. A council member asked, "Do you intend to lead this new board, Judge Ellsworth?" Naomi shook her head without hesitation. "I'm not proposing this to claim more power. I'm proposing to reclaim power from those who've abused it." Then, something unexpected happened. A former officer named Martin Dade, 59, suddenly raised his hand to speak. He had served alongside Sutter during his first 3 years on the force and was believed to have retired early due to internal disagreements. Martin stepped forward, eyes reddened, holding a battered spiral-bound notebook, its spine barely holding together. "This is my log. I wrote down every case where I saw wrongdoing. I never sent it. No one would have accepted it. But now, I think maybe it's time not to die with silence." He pulled out a page, bearing Sutter's signature, a date, and an internal record of a wrongful arrest. At the bottom, scrawled in red ink, no action. Supervisor ordered deletion. The chamber went silent. Naomi stepped forward and received the paper, cradling it like evidence in a courtroom trial. "This is why we need citizens inside the oversight system," she said. "Because justice can't come from offices that only open between 9 and 5. By the end of the hearing, the committee held a preliminary vote, 8-1 in favor of establishing a new civilian oversight board. The formal decision would be announced within 14 days. That evening, when Naomi returned to her office, Carla Drayton was already there, holding a rough design draft. "What are you going to call the new board?" Carla asked. Naomi looked up at the ceiling for a moment, then smiled. "Call it Civic Light, to remind people that justice, like light, must belong to everyone." This time, everyone heard it, and no one dared turn the lights off again. October 12th, Fairbridge Federal Courthouse. Colton R. Sutter, former police officer, age 42, was found guilty on 11 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, acts of terrorism in a courtroom, threats against federal officials, destruction of evidence, and severe violations of constitutional rights. Presiding over the case was none other than Chief Federal Judge Malcolm Reeves, a longtime colleague, and the one who had personally asked Naomi to serve as an advisor on the case. Naomi didn't sit at the bench of honor. She sat in the second row, just behind the wooden divider separating the witnesses from the public gallery. But her gaze, calm, neither angry nor triumphant, was enough to make Colton lower his head for the first time in the entire trial. The sentence was read aloud, 160 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. Each word landed like a full stop, and an invisible power that protected him for nearly 2 decades. But to Naomi, it wasn't a period. It was a semicolon. Right after, the name Captain Ronan Willoughby, former Internal Affairs Supervisor of the Fairbridge Police Department, was called. Unlike Sutter, Willoughby didn't scream. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just sat still, pale gray suit wrinkled at the elbows, his tired eyes avoiding the room. The jury had deliberated for 3 days. Today, they reached a verdict. Conspiracy to conceal evidence. Obstruction of federal investigation. Falsifying over 14 internal reports across 7 years. And most seriously, coercing victims to withdraw complaints through implied threats. The court sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison without parole, along with a permanent ban from holding any public position related to oversight or law enforcement. Naomi didn't look at him, but when she heard the sound of handcuffs snapping closed around Willoughby's wrists, she gave a small nod, as if the final gear of the old machine had just come loose and fallen away. With Ferris, Kane, Willoughby, and Sutter all convicted, the old system that once protected countless wrongs had completely collapsed. But to Naomi, the bigger question remained: how do you build a new system that won't make the same mistakes? That evening, as she exited the courthouse, Reagan Voss caught up with her at the steps. "How does it feel to watch him sentenced?" Reagan asked, mic already live. Naomi didn't answer right away. She looked up at the autumn sky, the wind catching the hem of her coat, and replied, "I didn't come here for him. I came for the victims no one remembers, and for the ones who will never become victims, if we do what must be done after today." Reagan nodded, still writing. "So what's next?" Naomi smiled. "Taking the bird out of the cage isn't enough. You've got to dismantle the cage." She wasn't speaking in metaphor just to be poetic. Within 2 weeks, the Ellsworth Reform Initiative, VRI, had been drafted, a proposed federal legislation for deep structural reform, including immediate suspension of internal oversight powers for any officer under investigation, mandatory public release of complaint records older than 90 days, required ethical review every 3 years for all justice and law enforcement leaders. The bill stirred national controversy. Some governors called it government overreach. Several police unions deemed it an insult to the badge. But to the public, they called it hope. At a community town hall in Charleston, an elderly woman, Eloise Tanner, 77, stepped up to mic, her voice trembling. "I have 3 sons. One was arrested for a broken taillight. One was held too long for refusing to unlock his phone. I don't want my youngest to learn how to lower his head when he sees a badge, like his brothers did. If this law helps him lift his chin, then I'd sign it 10 times over. The lesson from the Sutter case wasn't just in the charges. It was in the system that allowed those charges to multiply in the dark. And Naomi knew, for light to reach every corner, you need more than a verdict. You need a door open from the inside. And this time, she was the one holding the key. Just 6 months after Colton Sutter's sentencing, Fairbridge, once a city buried in silence and cover-ups, became the epicenter of a reform movement spreading across America. From Detroit to Tallahassee, city councils began reopening old case files, cases once abandoned, complaints once dismissed for lack of evidence. The whole country began asking, if Fairbridge could do this after years of silence, why can't we? National broadcasts aired almost daily. Another police department formed Civilian Oversight Council. Iowa officially adopts Ellsworth oversight model. What had once been labeled radical was now a national standard in police training manuals. Naomi Ellsworth, 48, went from sitting behind a bench to advising federal justice reform at the highest level. But she didn't move to Washington. Her office remained in room 214 of the Fairbridge Federal Courthouse, where sunlight still streamed through old oak-framed windows and the scent of leather-bound books mixed with her familiar Earl Grey tea. When asked why she declined an official seat in the Justice Cabinet, Naomi simply smiled. I don't want to write laws from an ivory tower. I want to stand with the people who were once voiceless and listen to them define justice in their own words. One early spring afternoon, a new mural was unveiled on the west-facing wall of the Fairbridge Courthouse. It wasn't Naomi. It wasn't Sutter. It was 8 everyday citizens. People who had once filed complaints, once been silenced, once told they didn't matter enough to be heard. At the mural's center, bold letters read, "Justice begins when silence ends." Students, veterans, nurses, mail carriers, they lined up to take photos beneath it. And among them, Naomi stood off to the side. No one noticed, but in the hearts of the people of Fairbridge, she was the first punctuation mark in a sentence the country had never finished writing. A story that began with a gun in a courtroom. But what changed America wasn't the bullet. It was the calm of one woman, standing in the barrel's path, without flinching. Today, law schools teach her name in courses on modern reform. Rookie officers read the Fairbridge case as a moral cornerstone, not just about law, but about courage and dignity. Naomi never called herself a hero, but because of her, an entire system learned this. Justice isn't punishment. Justice is awakening. And a nation, someday, will awaken too, so long as one person stands still at the right moment. Thank you for taking the time to watch this story. If it made you think, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because each one is a piece of truth few dare to tell. Before you go, I've picked out 2 more videos I believe you'll love. Keep walking this journey with us, because justice isn't just a destination. It's how we choose to walk there together, wishing you peace wherever you are